Okay, so let's talk meat. What's happened to meat demand over the last 10, 20, 30 years? Actually, it looks brilliant. Here we go. If I take the Rabobank figures looking back to 1980, we see accelerated growth, terrific growth, double-digit growth in demand for the major meats and eggs. Although, interestingly enough, as you see, as we move through 2015 to 2020, 2030, the rate of growth of demand, it's still at wonderful levels, but it's slowing. It's slowing slightly. But that picture looks so damn good, I think we could probably stop now and go home and just enjoy the wonderful ride we're going to have as consumers increasingly eat more meat. What do you think? If you look, too, at the expected growth over the next 10 years, so which are the heavy growth areas? Well, it's poultry. Well, it's pork. Well, it's eggs. And isn't that the area that most of you are operating in? Brilliant. So it's going to be a super profitable ride going forward. Or not? Let's see. Because if I look at what's happened to meat prices over the last 10, 20 years, well, we're going back to 2000 here. Actually, again, the picture is pretty good. That overall, if you take all the meats together, have a sort of mixed meat price. You see growth in meat prices, but there's certainly a lot of volatility there. And I would think you're probably going to see more volatility. So there are some challenges here for running businesses. We're in a brilliant business. People are eating more meat, as Eric said, a combination of more population and higher income, then you will see a switch to more protein. But it's going to be a bumpy ride. And if you think that's bumpy, can you imagine what it's been like operating in the dairy industry over the last 5 years? Just look at dairy prices. What's happened to dairy prices, milk powder prices over the last 4 or 5 years? I just can't imagine what it must be like trying to move from $5,000 plus a ton for your milk powder to a third of that. Do you think they put that into their business plans? I mean, what did that reflect? It was the most peculiar period, and it's been very, very recent. It was driven by, here we are, prices very high. What did producers do when prices are high? They said, brilliant. Current prices are going to go forward to the future, so let's expand production. And then, unfortunately, that all happened at a time when the principal market for dairy products, for export dairy product, which was China, decided to cut back. And that was cataclysmic. You've seen a torturous 2-3 year period in the dairy industry. No, very, very difficult. And what's more, as I say, I think if you look at the long-term demand for dairy products, it looks pretty good. So sit back and enjoy it. No, it's a roller coaster. Say here, buckle up, seat belts on, and crash helmets on, too. It's going to be a tough old ride. But overall, the demand looks good going forward. So let's take, what's the big picture for meat? This always intrigues me, and we'll do with China and without China. Because remember, in any market, it doesn't have to be meat, whatever happens in China has a disproportional impact on overall market conditions. If the Chinese population elect to eat 1 kilo more of anything, of cabbage, then it means somebody's got to find 1.3 million tons of additional product, which sounds sort of terrific. But what happens if they decide to eat 1 kilo less per person? That means suddenly the market collapses because there's 1.3 million tons washing around the world looking for a place to go. So here we are. Meat with China. We've got a huge overall total meat consumption. But what intrigues me, when I'm working with the meat industry around the world, they don't consider fish. Somehow they think that's on a different planet. And yet clearly fish, along with red meat and other meats, is just part and parcel of the options available to consumers if they want to have meat on their plate, if they want to have protein on their plate. So for my mind, the number one meat in the world is fish and seafood. followed by pork, poultry. If you take out China, then it's fish and seafood and poultry together are the two major players. And I think we keep our eyes on that, I suggest. So, Eric's already talked. Here we are, world population. We all know these figures. Current population, what, about 7.3, 7.4 billion in 2016? Is that a lot? Do you think 7.6 billion is that's 7,600 million? Well, that strikes me that it's a lot. And where Eric, actually, you and I emigrated or went to Canada in the same year. 1973, I moved to Canada. And the population of the world in 1973 was about 3.6 billion. Now fast forward to 2016, so what's that, 43 years later, and the population of the world has doubled. So in my professional lifetime, the population of the world has doubled. In fact, we contributed an extra 2, and we're rather proud of that. But we've doubled the population of the world, and in general, we've managed. The incidence of malnutrition is still too high, but it's a lot better than it was 43 years ago. But the issue is, are we going to be able to add another 2 billion over the next 30 years? And that's what is so exciting and also what's so worrying. Actually, I think, without a doubt, we can cope with another 2 billion people, that we will be able to produce enough food, that Malthus was quite wrong. The issue is whether we'll do that in a way that harms the earth. And I think I'll talk more about that later. So here we are, from 7.3 billion, or whatever it is, moving to 9 billion. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the best means of birth control apart from sexual abstinence? What would you think? Birth control pills, perhaps? It's education for women? Well, actually, for my mind, what it is, it's urbanization. You drive people into cities, they have less children. I mean, South Africa is a wonderful example of that. That if you look at rural families in South Africa that have got small shambas, small farms, they might have 6 or 7 children. The additional child is cheap labor and also an insurance policy for the parents. The minute they move into Joburg, for example, then average household size goes from 6 down to 3 or 4. So as we're seeing increasing urbanization across the world, it will slow the rate of population growth radically, because more children in an urban setting is just much higher cost, and it will drive population growth down, by the by. So, but if we take this extra 2 billion that we're going to add, of course, not every country is going to see population growth, and the best example, or the worst example, if you will, of lack of population growth or population decline is Japan. Here we are in Japan with 126 million people, roughly, give or take, and each year from here on in, they will lose 1 million. Can you imagine operating in a market where each year there is 1 million less people in your market? That underscores for me why in Japan that most major grocery retailers, most major food retailers make little or no profit. And that's why you see Japanese companies all around the world looking for, can they buy other businesses in regions where there is growth? Because there's very little growth in Japan. Now, if you take that shape, that demographic profile, what other country might look like that? Well, I tell you what, let's go forward, I think it's only 15 years, and here we go. In 2030, China's demographic profile will look very similar to the current demographic profile for Japan now. So what, you might say? Well, China will get old before it gets rich. And there are huge implications to that. think of all the social and health problems associated with a massive country of 1.4 billion, let's say by then, increasingly getting older, with those sort of disease health problems associated with old age. I think we'll have to keep our eye on that from a meat market point of view, for sure. So, just quickly, an old slide for me, but if I look at 2020 and look at the international meat markets, what do I expect to see in terms, where will the bare-fisted, eye-gouging, ear-pulling battle for international meat position be? It will be between industrially produced fish and industrially produced chicken. And why? It comes down to cost competitiveness. That, as we know with tilapia or bassa or catfish, whatever you want to call it, that they're converting at about 1-to-1. Look at the best chicken feed conversion ratios. Again, as Eric was saying, it's moving towards 1. Let's say it's 1.51. That will be the real battle. And as I tell those in the beef industry, for example, or even the pork industry, you want to be a long way from that battle because you'll get your clocks cleaned, because that is super-duper competitive. And it's the tilapias, it's the pangasiuses of this world that will be sort of driving, will be hammering into chicken to try and get share of stomach, as we say. And I'm always reminded about, that's coming from the UK and Canada as they come both, that actually our consumption in many northern European countries of fish is relatively small. And I'm reminded when I'm elsewhere, I was in Malaysia recently, and I just love this. Here's fish bratwurst. The Germans would have a heart attack if they see that. What fish? It's a brilliant product, as it happens, just the job. Okay, so let's switch away from, but one thing is certain, for this growth in demand for meat over the next 20, 30 years, it is largely driven by emerging countries, with China right up there on front, really leading the charge. But if we look at developed countries, so-called developed countries, higher income countries, what's happening to meat consumption? In general, I see peak meat, where we don't expect to see on a per capita basis any increase in meat consumption. In some countries, there's a decline. Certainly is in the UK, certainly is in France. Actually, specifically, there's been a decline in the old-fashioned red meats, if you will. So beef has suffered badly over the last 10, 15 years. In France, for example, the great meat-eating countries, beef consumption fallen rapidly. Mind you, at the same time, poultry continues to show upward growth. But in the UK, why would people be cutting back on meat? For a range of reasons. For health, saving money through difficult times, animal welfare concerns, food safety concerns, and environmental concerns. Who is most likely to cut back? Older people, that's me, and women in particular. Why would I cut back on meat? How might your diet change when you turn 60? Some of you out there are over 60. What happens when you get over 60? What do? You eat less. What do you eat less of? Well, meat. What do you eat more of? Fruit, vegetables. Why would you do that? Because you sort of look out when you're 60, remember. On a stage, you can look right out, and if you look right out, what do you see? The end. You go, dear Lord, there's the end. I don't want the end. Don't give me the end. How can I? And then there's an unseemly rush to change your diet, to fix the problems that we created for ourselves in the last 40 years. Suddenly it's all about fish and fruit and vegetables. A bit late in the day, as it happens, but there we go. And I'm sort of intrigued how meat, that meat in its largest sense, from a consumer perspective point of view, in many developed countries has changed. So in 1973, yes, I went to Canada. The principle in Eastern Canada, the biggest supermarket was called Dominion. It had a jingle which irritated us all, which was, it's mainly because of the meat. Really, it meant it was mainly because of the beef. People selected Dominion because of the high-quality beef. Then if we went up to the cattlemen of the US, for example, in the 90s, had a very successful program, which promotion, advertising, which was beef. it's what's for dinner. It was a TV commercial. Beef, it's what's for dinner. And I think that's sort of wonderfully old-fashioned now from a consumer point of view. Because if you say, what's for dinner? People don't say beef or chicken or pork. They say, what's for dinner? I don't know, Chinese, Italian, a takeaway. And so it's not, we don't identify the specific protein. And say, if we take millennials, with that sort of rather pesky group who are between 20 and let's say 35, they don't even know what what's for dinner means. In fact, as I say here, for millennials, they don't say what's for dinner, they say dinner? What's dinner? Because increasingly they are pushing away the 3 meals a day. How do they eat? Mini meals, or maybe just snacks through the day. So that 3-meal, nutritionists hate it, but you can see it's changing. Moving on. And I think there are some real threats, and it's already been mentioned again by Eric, but if I look at what's coming our way right now in supermarkets in the US, if we take Impossible Foods, as it said, they raised a whopping $108 million for its plant-based burgers. Actually, they've raised $180 million to develop this plant-based burger. This week, Tyson, the great company, the great chicken company, Tyson, amongst other things, has taken a 5% stake in Beyond Meat. So has General Mills, and so has Bill and Melinda Gates. There are big, heavy hitters and those from the food industry who see there is some traction, there's some future for plant-based foods that mimic meat. I see lots of it happening. Beyond Meat, the Beyond Burger, it's just rolling out in Whole Foods, and it is having there's a proportion of the market that really like the look of it, for health, environmental, but also for taste reasons. And back at home, it intrigues me that if I look at Quorn, remember Quorn is owned by Monde Nissin from the Philippines, bought last year for the better part of $1 billion, so it's a mycoprotein, it mimics chicken, if you will. So here we are, Quorn. They even call it chicken pieces. It's got nothing to do with chicken. Corn roast, etc. Why have I put that up? Because when I go and buy meat in my local supermarket in the little town I live in Wales, when I've done my shopping, I get a coupon from the supermarket trying to attract me back. So say, here's £2, so let's say, well, it's $3 off your next purchase when you next come to the supermarket from any purchase of meat or poultry or corn. And we see that as the same thing. Corn is merchandise in the same cabinet as the meat. We don't see any different. It's already there in the marketplace. And these are just, sometimes it's completely bizarre. That these are meat-free products. We just see more and more of them. But this one, what do you think of lamb yong, vegetarian ham, chicken flavor? I mean, why would you? Why would you? Or I love this one. The brand name is Meatless Select Fishless Tuna. Oh, here we are for a bouillon cube, so a stock cube like Knorr, like Maggi, not beef. Completely crackers. And Stonewall jerky, that's a vegetarian jerky. Again, there's no telling what people will buy, but no, let's move on. But I do know that plant-based proteins are going to have a big day, and they will be a big competitor for us. Here we are with Unilever. Remember, Unilever has Hellmann's, the world's best-known mayonnaise brand. They took Hampton Creek, which produces a product called Just Mayo, which is made not from eggs, it's made from pea protein, amongst other things. They were going to take them to court because they said to have mayonnaise, a mayonnaise product, it must, by definition, include eggs. That was in 2014. 2 or 3 months later, they decided not to take them to court. And in February of this year, Unilever launched its own eggless mayonnaise. What does that tell me? Plant-based egg and meat analogs have market traction. They're in our space right there. And I can't help but notice in my markets, in many markets, that increasingly you see vegetarian-based meals that are sold on the basis that they are really tasty. It's not anti-meat or anything. He said, have this, in this particular case, have this lentil-based meal because it is just brilliantly tasty. And the diet which is emerging, particularly again for younger consumers, again back to the millennials, is this flexitarian diet. What is flexitarian diet? That means that during the week, people increasingly will elect to have a vegetable-based meal. Not because they don't like meat. Look, we're omnivores, we like meat. But they'll just have something else apart from meat. It's in our competitive space, I would suggest. And of course, look, suddenly dairy is about protein. Here we are with Arla, a great international brand it's a farmer-owned brand from Denmark, Sweden, and the UK, as it happens, selling quark or yogurt-based products on its protein content. 1 pot of Arla protein quark, that's as much as a chicken breast or 5 egg whites. That's straight off their advertisement. They're in our competitive space. Protein milk, here we are in Ireland, for athletes. So protein is much more than meat. And when I see, for example, Danone, which is the number 2 international dairy company, really after Nestle, they just paid $12.5 billion to buy White Wave from the US. Why did they want to buy it? Because they wanted its non-dairy dairy business. So it's almond milk, soy milk, coconut milk, it's pea milk. No, there's lots of others in our space. I tell you, we have to watch them. And as already mentioned too, again by Eric, look, I'm intrigued to see that in Asia, for example, eating insects it's been a tradition for millennia. In Thailand, for example, stir-fried crickets, with soy sauce and pepper. It's a student snack if you're drinking beer. And now, of course, we've got cricket-based products. This is out of the US, in particular in crickets, again as snacks, chirps, just looking, like for dipping, etc. Is that a future? Is it insects for human food, or is it insects for livestock food, or is it both? I don't know. But also, I think, which is a little bit scary, is if I look around the world, for our industry, there are major forces, government, special interest, consumer groups, who are focusing on meat, and they want to see us eat less. It's huge. And it will have an impact overall. Here are Scientific American. People still don't get the link between meat consumption and climate change. These are major and respected periodicals who are saying meat hurts the environment. Meat hurts health. World Health Organization says processed meat causes cancer. And here we are in China, the largest consumer as a nation of meat. China plans to cut meat consumption by 50%, cheered by climate campaigners. And we have World Meat Free Day. Don't underestimate it. This is an agenda pushed by zealots, and in many respects, they've got good arguments, and it will have an effect on overall demand for our products. Danish Council on Ethics, this was just last month, beef is climate-damaging food. I mean, perhaps from your perspective, or for many of you here, the plus side is that it's a particular focus on dairy cattle, on beef, and on sheep as being the environmental damages. Actually, the health damage, it tends to be processed pork. There we go. So we get this relentless deluge of information and sometimes misinformation relating to meat production. Like, for example, again, National Geographic, that's not a silly magazine, but 1,800 gallons of fresh water go into 1 pound of beef. Beef is firmly in the bullseye, the target for many campaigners, and it will have an impact over time. So, look, what's happening to consumers, particularly in the developed world, and I've just picked out some, the flags, Britain, Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and then the European Union. What's happening there? And here's some British figures. I mean, it's not pretty, but it increasingly reflects the household reality. In the UK, of all the meals eaten last year, let's say, in 2015, all the meals eaten, 40% were eaten by one person alone, so-called solo dining. Right? And of 80% of the meals were eaten by 2 people or less. Now, so what? Is that just sort of interesting cocktail conversation? Or do you think it might have an impact on our industry? What happens when just one person is sitting, they won't be sitting down, they might be standing to have a meal? What impact will that have on our business? I would suggest, for example, it drives eating away from home, eating out much more. It means it drives eating that when we go to shop, we don't now, increasingly we don't, I'll use an old-fashioned term here that some of you might remember. We used to go to supermarkets to buy things that, again, you probably won't remember it. We used to go to buy things called ingredients. We don't do that now. We go to a supermarket for a meal solution. We either buy the meal or the components of the meal and we bolt them together at home, and that's cooking. It's not pretty, but it's what we do. And it has a huge impact on our industry, on what consumers are willing to pay. What will they pay more for? They'll pay a little more for health, they'll pay more for better taste, but really they'll considerably more. They'll pay a lot more for a meal solution or a snack solution. Don't give me a problem, give me a solution. It's 4 o'clock, I'm not sure what to put on the table, the kids are starting to get hungry and crabby. I've got to get a meal out there and in a hurry. Give me the solution, don't give me the problem. And clearly a big lump of meat, that's a problem, that's not a solution. So yes, these pesky millennials, they skip meals, they replace meals with snacks. They say they like to cook, but I'm not sure. They're very active online. They look for recipes and help from online, from TV, etc. Of course, they use apps. They're very happy to buy meal kits. So not the ingredients which have been put together by somebody else. They're interested in health and food, and they're very interested in the social aspects of food production. I'll come back to that. But I was in Holland the other day, just for an example, about this one-person households. Okay, so the better part, what do I say here, that 30% plus of Northern European urban households are one person. That's a little sad, but it reflects reality. And so here's the egg carton for Holland in Albert Heijn, which is Ahold internationally. It's a pack of 7, one a day. You know, that's the pack for a one-person household. Or in many of the supermarkets I shop in this would be very typical. There's your protein for the evening. It's the piece of salmon for one. I mean, the North Americans won't recognize that, is that piece is not big enough for your pet, let alone for you. And so when I go to buy, I'm a household of 2 when I'm home, which isn't often, but I'm happy to be home. So what about my supermarkets? They'll put out 12 meal solutions and say, buy 3 for £10. So buy 3 for $12. And essentially what they're saying here is that we will sort your meal solution problem for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at $2.20 per person per meal. And that's good value. So in this particular case, I took the burgers, the salmon, and the chicken. And they're all merchandised together. That's a long, long way away from the traditional method of merchandising meat in supermarkets, which is beef, pork, chicken. That bears no relationship to how people now shop. That gives them a problem, not a solution. This is moving towards a solution. Moving on. And so I can go one step further. I mean, Marks and Spencer's in the UK. This would be a Friday purchase. So it's the chicken, carrot and swede. So it's a fresh vegetable crush, which you can microwave, a New York vanilla cheesecake, and a bottle of red wine for $13. Why would you eat out? Why would you cook? If that's good food, that's good value. That is good value. And what we can see here is food retail and food service. So it's like restaurant, eating out and eating in is just converging. It's becoming one and the same thing, I would suggest. We can see that too. This is restaurants getting back at supermarkets. So we all know Uber. Well, this is Uber Eats. And what's Uber Eats? In, say, Manhattan, for example, each week, 6 well-known restaurants will publish a menu for the week. You can, on your Uber app, then order in this particular case, let's say Mighty Quinn would be the restaurant. The one I was selecting was brisket sandwich with burnt-end baked beans. Click, put that on my Uber account, and it arrives at my house or apartment, as it will be, within about 15 minutes. Brilliant. What's the cost? $12. Is that a lot of money? Well, that's about what you'd tip the doorman. No, it's not a lot of money. So there are so many new ways that we can get to consumers. Now, this is meal kits, for example, from Australia and New Zealand, moving on. And just to remind, I do a lot of work in fish, and it's just to remind us how well salmon has done over the last 3 or 4, 5, 7 years. And they're taking market share in premium meats from the rest of us. If you look at the success of sushi, it's a brilliant, fresh snack or main meal, and we don't have often an equivalent product. Salmon is eating our lunch, I would suggest. So we see this increasing complexity driving food purchasing behavior. It's about value, which is getting the price down, but it's also about values. It's about values, and increasing people want to know, what was the impact of food production on the earth, on animal welfare, on worker welfare, etc. So this is, look, a little bit exotic, but see if you get it with me. I'm saying, how do you like your meat? I'd like my meat with adjectives, please. Now, do you get it? So what do I mean by that? I think that if you're in the chicken business, then you're in commodities. You're in the commodity business. And I don't think there's very attractive margins in commodities. What are the adjectives about? I think that's where the margin is. So what do I mean by it? Do you want chicken? Well, yes, but I want what sort of chicken? Free-range chicken, free from, known provenance chicken, farmer Akmal's chicken, silky chicken, rare breed chicken, vegetarian diet chicken, organic omega-3 rich chicken. I want happy chicken. And I'm willing to pay more for that. I want environmentally friendly. The margin is in the adjectives. Trust me, I'm a doctor as this. And this is just one example from, I love it, from Marks & Spencer's, which is a premium retailer in the UK. And this is a chicken which sells at $23 per kilo. You know, that's a pretty good price for chicken. So is it just chicken? No. See how many adjectives. It's free range, 1. Pembrokeshire is a part of Wales where I live, so you know where it comes from. 2, it's corn-fed. 3, it's produced by the Scale family, the name of the farmer. 4, corn-based, we've done that. It's in a national park. 5, and the lovely birds are eating pastures rich in wildflowers and herbs. 6, you're slowly building up the adjectives as you build up the margin, I would suggest. Here we are with omega-3 chicken, which I like. I remind the fish people that in history, fish was about omega-3 and nothing, and nobody else could compete with them there. But now, increasingly, everything will have omega-3, but that's another matter. And I love this from, I was just checking in Safeway in Vancouver yesterday, and here we are, beef with adjectives, so it's sterling silver beef. So this is sort of premium beef. But look at this. I'm Canadian, I'm allowed to say this. It was 920 grams a portion for 2 portions. That comes in at 460 grams per portion. Is that a lot? Well, that would do me and my wife about a week's worth of meals. And here we are, let's go back to Holland, where the Netherlands' new dietary guidelines are saying that we should eat 460 grams per week, not 460 grams for dinner. And there'll be increasing pressure to get those plate sizes down, I would suggest. So is it just, where in the world do they want adjectives? Everywhere they want adjectives, and they're willing to pay for them. Here we are in Australia. Did real farmers produce the meat product? Well, yes, you can read about the farmer, and I'm willing to pay more for that. Thailand, Yes, the Thais like adjectives too. Here we are with all-natural, free-range, herb-fed pork. Do you think that's commodity pork? No. No. You don't want to be in the nouns. Don't be in the nouns. I know, for example, I won't offend if I talk about beef. I do a lot of work in the beef industry, and when I do, I notice that the beef industry is dominated by males. They all tend to be big men with large hands, no necks, red of face, and they increasingly look like the animals they slaughter. It's frightening. It's frightening. And when I say, what business are you in? They say, beef. And I know, they're commodity guys. That's not where the margin is. Trust me. And so consumers want their meat free, too. I want free meat, if you don't mind. Give me free meat. And I want adjectives added, not additives added. I want it antibiotic-free, hormone-free, additive-free, Campylobacter-free, Salmonella-free, E. coli-free, GMO-free, woody breast-free, free-range, gluten-free, and for beef, deforestation-free. And I just expect that increasingly. I'm not going to pay more for that. Here's sausages with free adjectives in the UK, gluten-free, wheat-free, dairy-free. And if you look at that sort of pushback against antibiotics, it's unstoppable, isn't it? Here's The Economist, which is a decent magazine, my comic on a Saturday, when the leading article from a few weeks back is when the drugs don't work. When I'm in Singapore, we're treating antibiotics like sweets. McDonald's, the pressure they're under, it's just huge. And so around the world, not just in silly Northern Europe, just everywhere I go, people want to know more about who produced the product. Can I see how they produced it? Can I link to, show me that it didn't harm the environment? It's so, so important. Do they like GM? Well, no. I just flicked this in because it's intriguing. It's not so relevant particularly, but here we are with genetically modified salmon now approved for consumption in the US and Canada. So it's the first transgenic animal to win US approval for food. Do you think consumers are going to embrace it in North America? I think it's going to be a tough ask. They won't. I don't think they will. It's interesting, if you look at the market research from Canada, this is very recent stuff, 61% of Canadian consumers have negative impressions of genetic modification. And what's their biggest concern? They say, why do we have to? Do we need to? And they haven't sort of got it. The scientific community have not got the advantages of genetic modification and how it can transform productivity over time. We've still got a lot of work to do. What do I think is going to happen? I think it's going to take just a long time, particularly in higher income countries, for people to embrace GM. I mean, we're willing to wear it because of cotton. Actually, we're less fussy about it being fed to the animals that we eat, but it's still very sensitive. We have to tread warily, I would suggest. And what sort of concerns me is that here we are, it's values and values, but so remember, value is price. And when I look and see in major fast food companies, you've got the dollar menu. And we're paying $1, but we still want free range for $1. We still want grass-fed, antibiotic and hormone-free, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's really dangerous. And what it tells me, looking forward, what do I think is going to happen in our meat industry over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years? We'll get more and more fraud. Why? If you look what happened, whenever you get a price premium, by, say, more adjectives, as I say, so free range, corn-fed, etc. Wherever you can make a little more for your product because of the premium attributes you've added, and attributes that are very difficult to taste, you take them on trust. Whenever you get that, you will get fraud. I mean, the best example is non-meat, is something called Manuka honey out of New Zealand, which sells for 10 times the price of regular honey because it has strong antibacterial properties. And actually, in the UK last year, we imported more Manuka honey than was produced in New Zealand. Do you get it? Whenever there is a premium like that, you'll get fraud, and we're going to get plenty of it in our industry. And internationally, the meat industry is notorious for it. What's the cost of food fraud? Let's look at what Warren Buffett, the great investor from the US, from Hathaway, his company, the cost. it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently, says the man. Absolutely right. Watch for food fraud. Moving on. What I like about what I see around the global food industry is that increasingly farmers are becoming fashionable. That people, it went 10 years ago, no interest in where it was produced. We'll just go out to the where do you get milk from? Well, from the supermarket. And now increasingly we say, well, actually, how was it produced and who produced it? So farmers have become fashionable. And so I can see in my market, here are supermarkets saying we only work with farmers we trust who share our passion for quality food. And moving into this area, which is so important about environmental sustainability, etc. And what's pushing companies to be more environmentally, sustainably orientated? Well, first of all, because we just should do it, because it makes sense for the planet. But increasingly, too, there are special interest groups who are measuring our performance. I mean, here we are with the Union of Concerned Scientists. I'm not quite sure who they are, but they are measuring these major companies that we all know here on how positive or negative they are on deforestation-free beef policies. So this is sort of aimed at Brazilian beef, often, saying, did you destroy tropical forest environments to grow the grass that fed to beef? So constantly across the food industry, we're now being measured. And what's more, by influential organizations that can really create havoc if we don't meet consumers' requirements. Here we are behind the brands. So we've got Oxfam, for example, and they will measure major food manufacturers on land, women, farmers, workers, climate, transparency, etc. Water, how efficient are you? And what this shows is how Unilever and Nestle, who I don't represent, but I think that they're starting to do a brilliant job in this regard, where they understand that the basis of business is doing things right for the world, socially to be correct, and then to see how can we make money out of that, not start the other way around. Palm oil buyers scorecard, it goes on. And here we are with an app. We talked about apps earlier. This is the Boycott app. What's that? So this is US, of course. You get the Boycott app. Then you decide which are the issues that you're most interested in. Animal welfare, treatment of women, etc. You plop that in, and then as you're shopping, you just go bop, bop, bop on the food products, and it gives you a readout of how those products or the companies perform on the issues you're concerned about. This is sort of huge, not least, again, driven by younger, under, say, 35-year-old consumers. So Nestle and Unilever leading the fast-moving consumer good pack on triple bottom line business approach, and it's just something that increasingly you can see is being embraced by the global meat industry. So will people pay more? Will consumers pay more for green products, for sustainable products? Well, it's intriguing. If I look at the data, they say they will, but, what do we say here? That 38% in the US say, yes, they would pay more for food and beverage products that are produced sustainably. But my belief is they won't. They simply expect it. And so the green bar is going up in our industry. And do you get a premium for getting over the green bar? No. But you get discounted if you're under it. And I think that's the issue. Get over that green bar, I would suggest. Here we go, just finishing. So long-term global demand outlook for meat, it really looks strong for me. But boy, is it going to be volatile. And dairy is a wonderful example in that regard. Watch out, because there are very, very strong competitors which are not in meat as we know it. It's mimic meat, or it's plant-based protein meat, and they will be in our market space. Meat consumption is in the firing line, particularly processed meats, and particularly beef as it happens, and lamb. And I think we'll see an impact of that because it's pushing on health, it's pushing on environment. I believe consumers will pay more for less. But the trick is working out in our business, what do people value and are willing to pay more for? And I say, they won't pay more for nouns. They will pay more for adjectives. The green bar is moving up. And increasingly, consumers won't pay more for green, they just expect more. And this is a bit trivial, but just to finish, I was having a cup of coffee the other day in Australia where I do a lot of work. And funny enough, the coffee shop was also a bike shop, which is a bit odd, isn't it? You know, you don't expect to buy a bike when you're going for a cup of coffee. And I was just looking, if you can read it, there was a Cipollini RB1000 second-hand bike that had been slashed in price from $24,000 to a giveaway $16,000. And I thought, wow. Now, talking to the sales lady who was running the show there, I said, do people actually pay that sort of money for a bike? She said, oh, yeah. We sell 3 or 4 a week. People come in and buy. And it was just a reminder in food to never underestimate what consumers value and are willing to pay more for. That's where the margin is. Thank you very much.